Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
The rumors of widespread human rights abuses in North Korea have been just that until now. A United Nations inquiry has just concluded the range and scope of abuse of that country's 25 million citizens is beyond what many imagined. What's more, the Commission of Inquiry says all of it has been sanctioned and enforced by the government of Kim Jong-un. Pregnant women starved, their babies fed rats and snakes. More than 100,000 people in gulags, systematic torture, everyone forced to inform on each other, entire communities denied adequate food, the bodies of the dead burned and then used for fertilizer. The Commission's chair, retired Australian Justice Michael Kirby, says he is not exaggerating when he compares the situation in North Korea with the Holocaust. And Kirby says that Kim Jong-un and others in his government should be tried at the International Criminal Court for committing crimes against humanity. Naturally, the North Korean government rejects the Commission's work.
As we stated time and again, those human rights abuses mentioned in the resolution have totally nothing to do with the DPRK.
But Justice Michael Kirby is not backing down as he sits down to talk to Al Jazeera. Justice Michael Kirby, thank you for agreeing to talk to Al Jazeera. Let's take a look at the Commission's work. You looked at 9 main areas. Which of those do you think are most significant, or all 9 equally significant in the scope of the atrocities that the Commission uncovered?
I suppose if one were to say which of the areas of our inquiry affected most people, it would be the deprivation of the human right to food. Because during the Great Famine in the 1990s, the plain fact of the matter is that about 1 million people in North Korea perished. They died of starvation. They died cruelly, and at a time when the government of North Korea was purchasing extremely expensive military hardware, MiG fighters, and other means to empower the 4th largest army on the planet. An amazing thing that 1.2 million people are under arms. As well as that, there are about 8 million people in North Korea who are reservists. So together it makes the 4th largest army on the planet for a population of 23 million and for a population which is so greatly deprived of the basics of life, including the basic of food. And so all of them are important, but the right to food is so basic to human existence, affecting also the military, but not the elite, that it was a terrible and very wrongful deprivation of a fundamental human right.
And when you talk about this deprivation, the Commission's report outlines just how expansive this deprivation is, even from moments after a child is born. Indeed. The deprivation can begin.
Indeed.
That's pretty horrible.
It begins before the child is born, because the figures show that approximately 27% of newborns and up to 2-year-olds are stunted, and that 8% of children are seriously stunted. Now that is an extremely high figure by the world standards, and we know from the case of the Netherlands under occupation at the end of the Second World War, in their last winter under occupation, the so-called Hongerwinter, a huge number of children there were deprived of proper nourishment during gestation and after birth. The consequence of that really comes back to hit them 30, 40, 50 years on, and it hits them in terms of very high levels and early levels of Alzheimer's disease and mental incapacity, and That is a burden which is going to be with whatever happens on the human rights front in North Korea, that is going to be there for decades and decades to come, of little children growing into full adulthood with the damage to their brain from the fact that at critical moments when the brain should be expanding rapidly, they've suffered from severe malnutrition.
Do you see a second generation impact? Brainwashing, the state's seemingly complete control of people's thoughts, of what they discuss with each other in their homes, with their neighbors, at work, at school. How do you erase someone's agency if you are the government of North Korea?
Yes, North Korea is truly a totalitarian state by the standards of the international definitions. It's not content to take control of the physical lives of the citizens. It has to intrude into their way of thinking, into their attitudes to government. It secures the neighbourhood watch in the area to keep tabs on each other. It implements the songbun system, which is the system of categorising citizens according to their loyalty to the government and the party. So that this is truly a state without any real equivalent in the modern world. Many states are oppressive, but generally over the physical being of the individual. This is a state that wants to get in and control the mental attitude, and of course that means controlling the access to the sources of information, to media, to books, to the internet, and to the other means by which people everywhere in the world today are now having access to each other and to the human beings who live their lives and from whose lives we can learn. That isn't available in North Korea.
This may seem a self-evident question, but what is the ultimate goal of controlling people's thoughts, of focusing their attention just on the regime of the Kim family?
Well, it's to secure loyalty, to ensure the survival, and to prevent and seriously punish anyone who dares to question or stray from loyalty.
We here in the West think of torture in the context of the so-called war on terror, of the war in Iraq, sleep deprivation, being hung by one's wrists from a ceiling for hours at a time, loud music played over and over, waterboarding. Is that the extent of it in North Korea, or is it much more than that?
Oh, it's much more than that. It involves exquisite punishments, the so-called pigeon torture of being unable to get your feet on the ground and being in a position where your feet have to be close to your chest. The aeroplane torture, all of these were illustrated in diagrams and drawings made by a person with some gifts in demonstration of what actually happens. It's a range of torture. Sadly, many of these exquisite tortures were taught during the Japanese colonial period, and there's a museum in central Seoul that demonstrates how, in learning from their colonial oppressors, the Korean government in the north has learned most faithfully and now imposes these punishments upon its own citizens. But it's not just actual punishment, it's taking people into political prison camps, which they deny exist, but which are demonstrated by testimony and also satellite images, take them into the prison camps, which number about 100,000 people even as we speak, and there deprive them of basics, deprive them of food, deprive them of dignity, and require them to search around looking for rodents and lizards and other things to get protein. It's and to live off grass and various things that they can scramble and get to. So it's even for a person like myself who has spent 35 years in a judicial office hearing the whole range of human cruelties and wrongdoing, Nothing in my life had prepared me for the types of testimony that I received, and some of it reminded me of the faces of General Eisenhower at the end of the Second World War, seeing the concentration camps, seeing the bodies that had to be disposed of. And it's really terrible to think that this is still happening in the world today in North Korea.
When you first discussed the report back in March with reporters, you said, contending with the scourges of Nazism, apartheid, the Khmer Rouge, and other affronts required courage by great nations and ordinary human beings alike. You raised the specter of Nazism, which some would say could be excessive. Were you being excessive, or is the evidence there to actually make that comparison?
I understand the viewpoint that one should greatly respect the particularities of the Holocaust and the enormous suffering, especially of the Jewish people in occupied Nazi Europe. But as I sat there listening to testimony of a man whose job it was to round up the bodies, to pick them and wheel them in a wheelbarrow, to put them in a vat, to set the vat on fire, to gather at the end of the inefficient process ashes, but also body parts, parts of legs, parts of arms sticking out of the cauldron, and then take them to the nearby fields and put them in the field as fertilizer. When I heard this testimony of believable witnesses and multiple witnesses saying similar things, nothing came to my memory so sharply as the recollection of images that I saw when I was a boy in the 1950s of the leaders of the international community after the Second World War, seeing similar images of naked corpses and body parts that attempts had been made to destroy human beings and to treat them as things. This is what led to the United Nations. It's important to insist on this. This is what led Eleanor Roosevelt and her committee to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, asserting that this is everyone's business. This is not just the business of the nation state that is involved. It's the business of the world, because unless we accept this in the international community, we will go on doing this, and that just must not be so.
Where does this sadism come from?
Well, you'd need to be a psychiatrist or you'd need to have specialties that I don't have. I think the bottom line is that in North Korea, at least as it's organised at the moment, the essential wellspring is self-preservation. It's the preservation of people who are in the elite. And this isn't just me who's saying this, it's Kim Il-sung who laid down the system of Songbun. It's something they're proud of, the notion that you can be categorised virtually at birth as to whether you are in the core class, in the hostile class or the wavering class, according to your sense of loyalty to the regime. And it's extremely difficult to get out of the class once you've been categorised, and so it's a sort of birthright of a kind of apartheid of your social and political loyalty. And so if you ask where does it come from, it comes from a notion that you can really assign people into categories and nothing effectively they can do can bring them into the elite, which will mean that they'll have access to education, they'll have access to good schooling and universities, they'll have access to food, especially in times of shortage. And this is just the society that has been built up and says it has a perfect human rights record with nothing to learn from the rest of the world and can reject the 167 proposals that are made by the rest of the world for the improvement of their society.
You touched a moment ago on the credibility of the witnesses. How easy was it to find them and to convince them to tell the commission what they had seen, what they had witnessed, what they had done in order to help build the commission's case?
Well, the Commission was not building a case as a prosecutor would build a case. We were neither judges nor prosecutors. We just had to make findings on the 4 questions that were set for us by the Human Rights Council. We had no difficulty getting evidence. There are 26,000 refugees from North Korea just living in South Korea. So there was a great pool of people, and there's a phenomenon, which I'd call it a Holocaust-type phenomenon. People who've been through great suffering have a deep feeling that they want to tell their story. And when they told their story, they did so in a remarkably laconic way. Overwhelmingly, it was very understated. They were just going through in their mind the remarkable experiences they had had during the period when they were suffering greatly in North Korea that took them into flight. We were very impressed with the witnesses, with their veracity and with their endeavour to be truthful. Sometimes, for example, they would acknowledge a respect for the original Kim Il-sung. And the fact that they did that was sort of proof positive that they didn't have a special hostility to the regime. They just didn't accept the awful things that were done to them and their family, and they had a feeling of obligation to tell their story. And of course we had an obligation to make sure that they did so only in private if there was any risk that their families would be endangered in North Korea.
The Commission tried and failed numerous times to get DPRK leaders to engage, to even acknowledge your communications. Did you go into this process expecting to be stonewalled? And what did you do to work around what some would argue, most notably China, that the report has a built-in bias because it doesn't have the North Korean side?
Well, we did everything we possibly could. My life's experience was a judge. I know how important it is to hear both sides. We reached out to North Korea. We did so multiple times. We did so to the Supreme Leader. We offered to have a representative on their behalf come to our public hearings to make submissions with our leave, to ask questions and to do a summing up and make written submissions, all of which they ignored. And there is a principle that if you give a person the opportunity to speak and they don't take it, then you can more comfortably accept the testimony that is received in the absence of availing them of that opportunity. Did we hear both sides? Well, we didn't hear anybody speaking for North Korea because they elected not to, but we heard perspectives from witnesses which told of their love of their country. People still love aspects of the country, even though there was cruelty and wrong, and how they miss their country. And it's a shocking thing that we're supposed to feel grateful for the reunions of about 80 families, which after 2 false starts was permitted at short notice in 2014. But in fact, this is a shameful thing that in this day and age of the internet, of Skype, of fast telephone services and so on, that there are still many thousands of people in North Korea and South Korea who can't speak to very close family members, though they would be within driving distance, quick driving distance of each other, and they just have no contact. This is a barbarous way of treating human love and human affection and proximity and blood, and it's a very wrong thing.
In your final letter to Kim Jong-un before the release of this report, you wrote the following: "The Commission wishes to draw your attention that it will therefore recommend that the UN refer the situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the International Criminal Court to render accountable all those, including possibly yourself, who may be responsible for the crimes against humanity referred to in this letter and in the Commission's report." Was that a brazen tactic? Was that a way to actually get Kim Jong-un to respond?
To be completely truthful, when that was put to me afterwards by media saying this is a very, very strong thing to do, it hadn't occurred to me as anything but fundamental due process. How could I, as a person who was conducting this investigation with my colleagues, go ahead and send him a report and not warn him? Otherwise, look at it on the other side, they could say, well, you were very duplicitous. You provided your report, you had a perfect opportunity to warn him, and you failed to do so. So we simply did what any proper and due process observing authority will do.
The Commission's report speaks repeatedly about crimes against humanity. For those who understand the term in a vague sense, what are the two standards that you identify that need to be met in order to make that definition?
Well, a crime against humanity has to be an egregious, violent crime, a crime that causes death and suffering on people. It has to be performed as an act of state by the state concerned. It's not just the chance actions of crazy officials or people who act in a way that is unkind or cruel. And it has to be such an offence that it shocks the conscience of humanity. And if you add those three ingredients and then apply that as the test, then the cases of abduction, the cases of the prison camps, the cases of the terrible crimes against women, a matter in our report that has not got a lot of international media or national media, that are really egregious. The crimes against the Christian population, the fact that the Christian population at the partition of Korea was 23% of the whole population and now is 0.016% on the DPRK's own figures. So it's a total decimation of the faith communities, and all of these are crimes against humanity, and they're brought to notice in this report, and that is the serious finding. It has to be considered by a prosecutor and got before a tribunal. And that's why we recommended the International Criminal Court as the tribunal most appropriate to deal with it. If ever there was a case for the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Tribunal, this is it.
Why crimes against humanity? Why isn't this a genocide?
The Genocide Convention talks in terms of extermination of a population or a part of a population on four grounds: the grounds of race, nationality, ethnicity, which are a category, and religion. Now,
you have the Christian community.
There is an argument that what has happened to the Christian community is a genocide, and we mentioned that in our report, but we said that in order to be sufficiently sure that this was a case of genocide of the Christian community, we would have to have more evidence. We would have to know whether this rapid, almost total, it's not a decimation, it's a multiple decimation of the Christian population, has happened just because of the propaganda of the state being opposed to religion as the opiate of the people, as Marx described it, or whether it has been actually killing large sections of the community, the Christian community.
How confident are you that the law, as an expression of the will of the international community, will prevail in the case of North Korea?
In the long term, very confident. In the short term, not so certain. But we're on a long journey here. It's a journey that as a little boy I first encountered when all children in public schools in Australia in 1949 were given a copy of Eleanor Roosevelt's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a poster of the Declaration was put on the wall of my little local public school in Sydney, Australia. And that gave me and thousands and millions of others the hope that we would live to see the day when human rights would be an actuality for everyone, no exceptions. We've made progress, we've definitely made progress, but there's still a part of the journey to continue, and it's been a privilege for me to play a little role in continuing it for the people of North Korea, and I'll be watching, observing and hoping that the future will be a happier future, because they have suffered greatly, and it's for their suffering that the United Nations established the inquiry and is having these high-level meetings to consider what can be done, what practical action can be done for the people of North Korea. That's the challenge for the international community.
Justice Michael Kirby, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.